Hello, everyone, and welcome to Homeland Security Today's look at the Department of Homeland Security at 20 years. After 20 years of service, we are interviewing some of the plank holders, the people who started the department, who were carrying their stuff around in a cardboard box and making sure that the combination of 22 federal agencies would go smoothly and that we'd be able to better protect the United States. My name is Christina Tanasichuk. I'm the executive editor of Homeland Security Today and also the CEO of the Government Technology and Services Coalition. Today, I am extremely honored to welcome Admiral James Loy, who's a former commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard and the first Deputy Secretary to the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, sir.
Great to see you, Christina.
Great to see you. And you look fabulous. And we're so happy you had some time to join us. Many people wonder, the word plank holder, I think, is very DC. It's very inside the Beltway. So could you explain a little bit about your role as a plank holder and how you got to DHS?
I'm happy to do that. And plank owner, by the way, is a nautical term more than anything else. It's all about those who happen to be in the initial cruise on any given Coast Guard or Navy ship. So that's where plank owner comes from. And plank owner was a very appropriate title, as you can imagine, for those of us who rallied around the president's call and the Congress's call in the days after 9/11. First of all, sorting out the immediate challenges of what 9/11 provided to all of us in our respective agencies. But then in the designed intent of first the executive branch in its proposals and then the Congress of the United States in its enactments to establish a number of different things, but most importantly, to establish a new cabinet level agency called the Department of Homeland Security. My background to sort of be a candidate for early work in that new department stemmed from a lengthy career. I was in the uniformed service, the Coast Guard, for over 42 years. And at the time of 9/11, I was the commandant of the Coast Guard office in Washington, D.C., but then dealing with and connected to, as you can imagine, our district set of district offices around the country, including Alaska and Hawaii. And focusing, of course, immediately on the Port of New York in the aftermath of the events of 9/11. We dealt with that in a fashion that caused us to react first and then hopefully plan better, so to speak, for the ensuing weeks and months attendant to securing, I'll use that term loosely, the ports and the airports of the United States of America. And the doing of that involved, of course, the establishment almost immediately of the Transportation Security Administration. So partway through the course of my Coast Guard work, President Bush called and asked if I would be willing to step across, avoid, and establish as the first administrator the Transportation Security Administration, which of course we've all come to know and love in our checking in process at airports across the country. That process was huge in terms of focus and the rallying of the FAA and other agencies to deal with aviation security, because after all, that's what happened to us on 9/11. It was an aviation security nightmare initiated by the aircraft that found their way into the targets, if you will, that the bad guys had in mind that morning. So standing up TSA became job one for me in the aftermath of 9/11. One of the things I did very early was to call a good friend that I had in the Israeli security agency and ask if I could come and visit. And so I took about an 8-day adventure over to Tel Aviv, and my good friend there, who was a member of the Israeli security agency, took me on a quick tour of all of the active elements of the Israeli security agency's attention to aviation security. And as you can imagine, there were few people in the world that had focused from a government or national perspective on the idea of aviation security, but Israel was one of those that had an extraordinary friend of the United States for so many years. And so they gave me the Cook's tour of how they went about the business of securing the airports of Israel, as well as their aircraft as they visited the world on the Israeli airline, the National Israeli Airline. That gave me a bit of a agenda to take back into the ensuing meetings that were held primarily in the White House with a gathering of people whose expertise was necessary to be brought to the table. And then we proposed aviation initiatives to the Congress. The Congress was extraordinary in listening and hearing very quickly and turning those into the Aviation Security Act and the Transportation Security Act that were the two key pieces of legislation that were the enabling devices for standing up the Department of Homeland Security. So Governor Tom Ridge was asked by President Bush to come. He was the incumbent governor in Pennsylvania at the time, my home state, by the way. And when the president asked, he and Governor Ridge were dear personal friends as fellow governors in Pennsylvania and Texas before President Bush became the president. And so when President Bush asked Tom to step away from his gubernatorial responsibilities in Pennsylvania and assume the process of standing up this new cabinet level agency to deal with the Homeland Security challenges of our country, Tom graciously said yes immediately. When I know that he was inbound to Washington, I called him in Harrisburg and went up for about what I thought would be a half an hour, 1 hour quick report that I could provide him on what was going on in DC with regard to the stand-up of his new department. It quickly became about a 4-hour meeting where he was extraordinarily savvy about asking the right questions. And I hope I was able to give him the good answers and then become a committed process attendant to Governor Ridge tying up his responsibilities in Pennsylvania and coming on down to DC. So after that visit, I went on about my responsibilities at the time as the Commandant of the Coast Guard. And it was not long thereafter that my phone rang and Tom asked me to join him in the work of standing up the new department. So that got me from TSA over to DHS. And then the establishment of that new department became job one for me for the rest of my time in government. Spent 2 years or so with Governor Ridge as we embarked on this extraordinary challenge of establishing a cabinet level agency responsible for the security and safety of the transportation modes of our country, and then the other elements that became part and parcel of the overall job description of the Department of Homeland Security as Congress enacted the legislation. And we took those responsibilities, of course, quite seriously and attempted to establish the ground floor elements required to fulfill our responsibilities in the law as had been prescribed by the Congress. So that's a snapshot of what we started out with in the immediate aftermath of 9/11.
Well, he certainly picked the right person Thank you for that. I think that really gives people an idea that you weren't just a plank holder. You were probably, the support beam or whatever it is, even below the plank. So we appreciate that background very, very much. And so I guess of all the people we're talking to, you and Governor Ridge, so how's the department done? Tell us what you think.
Well, I think it's a matter of whether or not you see the Department of Homeland Security on the front page, and frankly, I think the initial stand-up effort, and then the extraordinary group of people that have followed, not only as the Secretary at Homeland Security, but others in the respective agencies within the department, who had to shift gears and reallocate time, resources, materials, and energy to the new responsibilities prescribed for them in the Homeland Security Act. That was not an overnight kind of effort, but that was weeks and months of effort to, first of all, redefine and then realign, attended to those redefinitions of the responsibilities that the agencies inside the department had, and then how the department, as it was stood up, as it was staffed, became responsible for knitting together, if you will, the multiple challenges that each of those 22 agencies you mentioned earlier brought to the table, and sort of, if you can think of a patchwork quilt of sorts, wherein each of the patches in the quilt were challenged in their own right to shift gears and do what was necessary under the new law, and then the department's responsibility to knit those individual patches together to establish the entire cabinet level agency known as the Department of Homeland Security, vet the process of new people coming in, establish the relationships of so much consequence between the appropriators and the authorizers on Capitol Hill, deal with the international challenges that immediately faced the department and needed to be dealt with right away, and then seek, as I tried to do, as I mentioned earlier, the experts in this sort of field of endeavor, gather their inputs, gather their ideas, gather their organizational structures in terms of the way they did business, for example, as I mentioned earlier, in Israel, but also in France and in Germany and in all the NATO country members, to help us think our way through doing something obviously very challenging and very complex, but to also do something right and not do something, I'll use the word stupid, that would, that would go the wrong direction in terms of seeking national and international collaboration against what we were still sorting out, as you know so well, in terms of the threat posed by those that perpetrated the acts on 9/11 to begin with.
Absolutely. So of course, the job of DHS has been trying to unify all of those components that you brought together for these last 20 years. And they've done a tremendous job in many ways, and certainly have started responding to all of the emerging threats as time goes by, especially cyber. We see that all the time. And as you look at your time at the department, and certainly as the department worked through this last 20 years, where do you think they should be going in the future? Or what areas do you think are still a challenge that they're working on?
Well, I think the one at the moment that sort of is on the front page and challenges them daily is the southern border, the southwest border, as it's often referred to. But not only the land border between Mexico and the United States, but the adjacent water access in terms of dealing with the challenge that's represented, and in many cases perpetrated by elements south of the border that cause the migrants to make an effort to come to the United States illegally, and to deal with them on a personal basis in terms of the nightmare that's represented by their attempts often, for example, sailing vessels that are overturned in the middle of the Atlantic, or in the waters adjacent to the Florida and the Gulf Coast, with a view towards just the simple human tragedy that's represented by those migrants attempting over a water process or a water way of getting to the U.S. The challenges there are very Coast Guard in orientation, if you will, and so the department's challenged by way of Coast Guard activity, Customs and Border Protection activity on our southern border, to a dramatically lesser degree, but interestingly, also on our Canadian border, to protect the borders of the United States, the national borders of the United States, from intrusion on the part of overwhelming numbers of migrants seeking to get away from something, so to speak, as well as to get towards something, which of course they believe to be the opportunities presented to them should they be fortunate enough to find their way inside the United States. So there's the legalities attendant to all of that. There is the humane nature of the transportation choices the migrants often make in an effort to come to our country, and dealing with each and every element attendant to border security probably is the most public of the mission sets inside our Department of Homeland Security to be dealt with today. And again, my read on that is that the department is doing an extraordinary job of reaching for the intelligence end of that particular mission set, with a view towards having dramatically more time to plan for, cope with, and actually deal with the moment of major incursions being attempted in terms of migrant activity on the southwest border. So to me, of the moment, how the current department and its two agencies particularly responsible, CBP, the Customs and Border Protection folks, and the U.S. Coast Guard are attempting to handle that is the sort of the challenge of the day, if you will, in terms of my guess being that the secretary is dealing with that one very routinely on a day-by-day basis.
Absolutely. I completely concur, and I think most Americans watching this video would agree with you as well. It is certainly on the front pages all the time, and certainly the political arena has also grabbed hold of it and thrown it around quite a bit. So, well, we appreciate your insights. We appreciate how much you've done for the nation, from Commandant to the Coast Guard to transportation to DHS. You are truly a national treasure, and we want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for all you've done for the country.
Christina, it's very kind, and I would be remiss if I didn't sort of close our discussion with paying a salute and a tribute to the thousands of folks who have rallied around the banner of this brand new Department of Homeland Security, and on a daily basis come to work, do what they're expected to do what they're responsible to do in terms of service to our country. So with that team, I was honored to participate in the early days of DHS.
Thank you for that. There's a lot of criticism of the department, and they certainly deserve much more praise for all of their hard work and how they're 24/7 on the job trying to protect the American public in every aspect of their lives. So we really appreciate you saying that, and wish you a wonderful afternoon, and we will hear from you again soon, we hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.